Tonight, I'm wanting to talk a bit about, I want to talk about heaven a bit. And to be honest, it's not really a subject that we discuss a whole lot. I mean, we talk about the place, and we talk about how, it's where we're going, how wonderful it's going to be, but we don't really discuss about it much at length. And that's kind of what I want to do tonight. We sing the song occasionally, This World Is Not My Home. And in the song, we say that heaven is our home, not this world. But why is it really our home? Because, my house, I've been there my whole life, and so obviously you would say it's my home. But we've never been to heaven. What really makes it our home? Well, what makes a place a home to begin with? I mean, you have things like typically a home is secure, it's a place of safety. A home, I hope your home has good food. A home has good food. But the real thing that really makes a home is the people. Family, friends, loved ones. And it's because any place could be home with people, but what makes your home a home is because there are people there that know you. And so I'd like to present an idea tonight to start, and the idea is home is where you are known. It's nice because it rhymes. You can remember it easily. Home is where you are known. I want you to think about that. We're going to talk a lot about being known tonight and knowing. And this subject, being known by God and then knowing God, this subject is actually very important to me. And as I was studying for it, I realized how much it meant to me. Because for me, I'm an extrovert. I love talking to people. And so, people, friends, family, I'm just energized by that. I just love it. And that's all well and good until I realized that at the same time, I also happen to, I try to act more spiritually minded, or try to be more spiritually minded, and all that sort of thing, more for others and less for God, if you get what I mean. I try to be more spiritually minded so that I can, if someone asks me how I'm doing spiritually, I can say I'm doing good. Or if they ask for advice to me or something, I can offer them advice without feeling like I have my own giant issues going on. When in reality, you take the people out of the equation and things get very difficult for me because I'm not really doing it solely with God in mind. I'm doing it more for other people, or it's almost to impress others. Not in a selfish way, I guess, but in an extroverted way. And so that's why this is important to me, because by stressing the idea of what it means to be known by God and knowing God and how that applies with us thinking about heaven, I believe that it shows us on how, it gives a good example of how we can truly live for God better. It's also important, I believe, to discuss this, because we should know why we want to go to heaven. Why do we want to achieve our goal? I'm on the archery team at my school, and every year we go to a state qualifier. And if we don't really have the desire to go, we're just yeah, that'd be, let's try to go to state. We're not going to go because we don't know why we want to go. We have no extra desire outside of just the reason that we want to go. But if we know why we want to go to heaven, that increases our desire, the effort that we put in to live for God. So without further ado, for those of you who want to follow along, we're going to start off in Galatians chapter 4 tonight. Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9 say, "However, at that time, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those by which nature are no gods. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how is it then that you turn back to the weak and worthless elemental things to which you desire to be enslaved all over again?" So here, Paul's talking about how before we knew God, we were slaves. And then he says, you were free because you came to know God, or rather, you were known by God. And this is kind of a thought that sometimes isn't really, it's kind of what we could call common knowledge. Yes, God knows us. But in reality, it's actually a very crazy idea. It's a very big idea that God knows us. And it's something I want to spend some time looking at for a second. So what does this mean for God to know us? Well, what type of know are we referring to? Because if I asked you guys how many of you know me, probably most of you would raise your hand and say, yeah, we know Nolan. But then if I ask, how many of you really know me? Yeah, very few people would probably raise their hand. Family members, maybe a couple other people, but outside that, not all of you, not everyone really knows me super, super well, like, or truly knows me. And so we want to know, like, how is God just referring to knowing us as like, yeah, they're down there, I know them? Or does he really know us and truly know us fully? 2 Timothy 2:19 says, "Nevertheless, the firm foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows who are his." And so when you look at also passages in the Old Testament, like Numbers 16, it's the story of Korah's rebellion. And when Korah comes up before Moses and brings out his accusations, Moses tells him to come back the next day, and he says, God's going to choose his people. This implies the fact the Lord knows who are his, those who are his people. So to be known by God also means to be known that you are his, that you belong to God. And what does that kind of mean, to be known and belong? Well, I have this water bottle. It's a metal one. And my family doesn't like it because it's metal and it gets knocked over a lot, so it makes a lot of clanging noise. But I have this water bottle, and I've had it for a while. And it's dented up, and it's got like all these worn-off stickers on it and stuff. But I can tell you where I've gotten each of those stickers from and how long they've been on there. I can tell you why there are dents on certain spots and why it doesn't actually sit flat on a table, why it rocks. It's because I know that water bottle, because it belongs to me. And this adds a different layer almost of the thought of going to heaven. Because going to heaven now isn't just going home. Because if we are owned by God, because we belong to him, then going to heaven is also going back to our owner. Going back to where we belong. But we're more than just God's property. Ephesians 1:5 says that we're adopted. And 1 John chapter 3, verse 1 says, "See how great of a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we will be called children of God. And such we are. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him." So we're not only God's property, but we're his children. Once again, a thought that a lot of us might know. But when you think about it in regards to how it pertains to God knowing us and going to heaven, you can kind of get a different look at it. See, a child belongs to a parent, and parents know their children. But it's not just like knowing, like I might know something about something I own, but the parent has unconditional love for the child. For that also, and God knows us and wants us to know him because he's our Father, and we are his children. A parent's unconditional love for their child is like a shadow of God's. God doesn't just know us, but he knows us and loves us because we're his children. Okay, recap, because it seems like a lot sometimes. Heaven is our home because in home we are known. God knows us and we belong to him. And we are also his children and loved by him. That is part of what makes heaven home, is that we are known and loved there. I want to point something out. Heaven can technically be everyone's home because God knows everyone and also loves everyone. God's all-powerful and omnipresent, so he knows everyone. John 3:16, God so loved the world, he loves everyone. But he's given specific instructions on how to, per se, get home and become his child. If you want to get home, you have to follow these instructions that he's set up. And with that in mind, I want to talk about the other part of the thing we want to talk about tonight. How do we come to know God? And this is the thing that to me really resonates, is how to know God. Because if I want to live for God and better know like why I want to go to heaven, knowing God seems absolutely necessary. If God is our Father and he's our owner and he's our God, then we should definitely try and know him. 1 John has a few different examples talks about a little bit knowing God. One example is in 1 John 4, starting in verse 7, which says, "Let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love." So here you see, it says, "Beloved, let us love one another, For love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. We see, in order to love, or in order to know God, we need to love as he loved. We see it says, not only do you know God, but it also says you are born of God. So you're his child. There's that thing again. But it's more than just love that 1 John talks about. Chapter 2, verses 3 to 5 say, by this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments. The one who says, I have come to know him, and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God has truly been perfected. So to see, if you want to come to know God, you need to keep his commandments. And a lot of the world, or sometimes the world can take this and pick and choose out of this. Some people keep his commandments but have no love in the commandments, while others only choose to love but don't really care about the commandments, when really they're connected. You can't have one without the other. You have to love and love others, but show your love to God through obedience. And you have to keep his commands, but not out of selfish motives, but for a love for God. And then you will begin to know him better. But how can we get to know God fully? Well, creation shows God's divine nature, right? That's Romans 1. If we try to look and see where we can find God, we can see it in creation. But that's only supposed to lead us to the Bible. So we only know what he's left us in here. And even after trying to stay obedient and love and learn from God through Scripture, one can still feel, and I definitely feel this way sometimes, like at times, like I might know friends and family still better than I know God, which I feel like should be the other way around. It's part of why I believe that one can never fully know God while they're here, which is a bummer way to end the sermon, right? But turn to 1 Corinthians 13. This has become one of my favorite verses or passages in the Bible. And while we're turning there, I want to talk about this. Moses sought to know God as well. We're told in Numbers 12 that Moses spoke face to face with God and not through riddles like prophets might. And yet in Exodus 33, he still talks about wanting to know God better. And so even Moses desired this. But what should we say? Or what about us when we ask that? 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 8. Love never fails, but if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love, abide in these three. But the greatest of these is love. Here Paul is talking about spiritual gifts. And in verses 8 and 9, he talks about how people, or you might prophesy and know in part, but they don't really understand what they're saying fully or what they know fully. And then you get to talking about in verses 10 and 11, he compares these like the partial and the perfect, and talking about a child maturing to a man. It's kind of confusing. And so what's he trying to get across here? Well, a child doesn't really know a parent extremely well. A young child, at least. For instance, when I was 7, I knew my parents, but I didn't know them as well as I do now as a 17-year-old. And so when I was 7, I had a partial knowledge of them. But now that I'm older, I know my parents much better and have a more perfect, and by perfect I mean complete, knowledge of them. And so then you get to verse 12. Now we see dimly means like an enigma, like a riddle. We see dimly into a mirror, but soon face to face, we'll see God. Though it'll be an even more full thing than how Moses saw him. Now we know, he says, now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I have been fully known. And this is like a mind-blown thing to me. Because to know God, we know that God knows us completely fully. He's a very complete, he knows us better than we know ourselves, sort of thing. And to the idea of knowing God just as he knows us is a huge idea. So our last scripture we'll look at tonight is 1 John chapter 3. I'm going to reread verse 1 and also read verse 2. It says, "See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we will be called children of God, and such we are. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we will be. We know that when he appears, we will be like him, because we will see him just as he is." Why is heaven our home? We asked this at the beginning. Well, home is where we are known. And in heaven, we are fully known by God, where he is in heaven. But why should we want to go home? What's so great about heaven to begin with? Because in heaven, we will fully know God, and he will fully know us. And so while we're here on earth, we strive to get to know him as best we can during our lives. Striving for heaven. That's our goal, right? To go to heaven. But we strive to go to heaven because in heaven we get to know God more fully. We get to know him completely and perfectly. And that, in my opinion, that's what makes heaven so wonderful.